Welcome to the podcast. Today's guest is Lance Barton. Lance, welcome back.
Thanks, mate.
Right, so obviously we're deep in lockdown. For that, we don't really need to do a full intro with you because obviously you've been a guest before. So I did that first episode with you when you were what I thought was at the end of your mega session on Christchurch up at Lynch Hill back in the spring last year. But obviously I left you and I think you still have one night to go. So how did that finish off for you?
Yeah, pretty good. Obviously, it's a session that I've talked quite a lot about, and I really am milking it. But if I was ever going to milk a session, it would definitely be that one. Yeah, I still had one night to go. I was set to leave sort of mid-afternoon the next day after I'd spoken to you.
Mhm.
From what I can remember, I put another hit of bait out on the bar. Not a huge amount. I think I sort of stuck with my 15 spots I ended up on once the sort of patch was established.
Mm.
But what had happened that day that we did the first podcast was a friend of mine, which I'd also spoken quite a bit about, Robbie, came over and sat with me in the swim for a while. And we had a chat about a spot sort of down off the bar to the right. It had done a few fish, or a handful of fish that spring already. And I had a lead around that area quite a few times during the session, um, but it just didn't feel quite clear enough to put a rod on. And
Mhm.
anyway, after I'd explained this to Robbie, we had a few casts each with the rod. He had a little feel himself, and he was like, "Yeah, it feels a little more weedy than usual, but in his opinion, it was more than clean enough for a rod." So anyway, after a few more casts myself, I kind of convinced myself into putting a rod down there. So I think I put maybe a handful of sort of medium spoms over the top,
Mm.
put a spinner rig out, but I made it really slow sinking,
Right.
um, sort of balanced it right out, and I made the hook length slightly longer than the one I'm
Mhm.
using on the bar. So I think I went to about probably near 10 inches, I'd say,
Yeah.
with my usual C clip 3 ounce lead. Yeah, so that was it. Then we did our podcast, right? So the next morning, it'd been early hours again, sort of 4 o'clock. I had a take on that rod. The other two rods were still on the bar. Felt a
Yeah.
good fish straight away. Didn't really do much. Came in, dogged around under the tip a bit, went in the net, no bother. Didn't really look at it too much in the net. Kept my head torch off. Didn't want to draw too much attention to myself.
Yeah.
Slipped it in a sling, left it in there for an hour or two before it got light. Well, that ended up to be a fish called the Adidas fish.
Right.
Uh,
Nice.
yeah, she's. I wouldn't say the prettiest fish. I listened to my podcast back a few minutes ago just to make sure I sort of followed on nicely with this one, and
Mhm.
I talk about sort of typical Christchurch fish quite a lot. This one is not a typical Christchurch fish. It's quite a
Right.
big, pale, simo-y looking fish, but it's sort of got its own character in its own sort of way.
Mm.
And anyway, we got that up on the scales, and it fell just shy of 40, and 39.10 it was.
Right.
um, Robbie came round, did the pictures for me. Big thanks to him. Credit where credit's due. You know, I'm not ashamed to admit. Would I have put a rod on there without Robbie sort of convincing me to? Probably not. So definitely sort of a lesson learnt there that sort of low lying fresh weed, um, even
Yeah.
as it gets that little bit bigger and you think it's unfishable, with a slightly
Mm.
longer hook length, just balancing that pop up a bit more, so it's front
Yeah.
down on top is definitely a goer. So yeah, we I was in no rush to get the rod back as far as I was concerned. My session had been phenomenal. I was more than happy with what I got, and I really did take my time to get the rod back out once it was light.
Mm.
Didn't put any more bait in, just flipped the rod back out straight to the tip, first cast, lovely. Mid morning, there was sort of a few lads hanging around, a lot of lads coming on and off at that time, and the rod was away again. Um, we had we had some mega weather that morning. It
Mm.
was similar to what it was when you sat with me that evening. Really
Mm.
blowing down into my end, warm. It just looked lovely. It was perfect. and yeah, another heavy fish. Weeded me up almost instantly, um, just to the left of the spot. So me and a me and a pal took to a boat, went out, got over the top of the fish, and I remember looking down into the water, just seeing this huge weed bed, and I could just
Yeah.
see the tip of my lead core. And just as you know, that point in the boat where you get over the top of it, and the line is perfectly, going from the tip down to the fish.
Mm. Hmm.
Um, and just as I was about to grab the line, just to gently tease it with my hand, this huge common came up off the bottom, sort of flanked over the top of the weed, and bored itself back in. Um, it was. I remember thinking, "Geez, that's huge." And the first thought went through my mind was, like, I've had a big common. Like, what? Which one is that? Um, so I'd had the baby perch, um,
Yeah.
which went 43, I think it was, off the top of my head.
Mm.
And for a second, I thought, God, I couldn't have caught that one again. But it looked very similar. For a
Yeah.
split second, I saw it. Anyway, it bored from weed bed to weed bed, just for literally a couple of minutes, and soon went in the net. Now, I had a chap called Webby with me, who's done an
Mhm.
awful lot of time on there. Very good angler.
Mm.
And as it hit the surface and went in the net, he said, "Mate, I can't believe it. You've got the perch." And I was thinking, God, I have caught it again. How can you catch the baby perch twice in 1 second? And I remember just sitting there for a minute, like with this really odd feeling of, like, should I be happy with that? And Webby shouted over to Robbie, who was in 21 opposite, "He's got the perch." And we've got this on video as well. And Robbie shouted back over, "Go on, Lancey boy." And I'm thinking, "What? Hang on. Why is he so happy about that? It's recapturing the same session." And then it twigged that it was the perch, not baby perch. To brace those two fish was just mad. And I remember the short journey back to the swim where Webby was struggling with one oar. We were in a bit of a mess, to be honest. On the footage, watching it back, it's really funny. The wind was trying to blow us into the reeds, and Webby's got this one oar, and I'm in the front. And I've got the fish hanging off the side of the boat, which is obviously
Yeah.
trying to pull us one way. Anyway, eventually we got back in, and that fish hadn't done a capture for quite a while. I wouldn't like to say how long, but um, there was some talk about it possibly dying, or I think it was down on weight when it last got caught. Didn't look that great,
Mm.
so it was really nice to see her. Anyway, we got her out, and yeah, she fell just shy of 40 again. Not that it mattered at all. Up the
Yeah.
scales, it went 39.15. So at this point, I'm thinking this is crazy. Like,
Like a
yeah,
dream.
that's it. I was like, I'm done. That's it. Like, a rod stayed out of the water. We did all the pictures, got a soak in. Loads of lads came round. I mean, like I said, there was a lot of boys on that week, and yeah, it was just an electric feeling. It was one I will never forget. And like I said, if I milk a session or any fish, it'll definitely be them. Um, so yeah, we sort of got the fish back, stood. I was absolutely soaked straight through. I had my waders on for what reason I don't know, because they were full. Um, and I forget who it was. I think it was Rob Allen. Rob Allen was in the swim, and he said, "Right, come on, Nancy boy, get that rod back out." And I was like, "No, I can't. Like, I'm done. That's it. Like, how can it get any better than that? I've wasted the purchase." He was like, "Do it, do it." And anyway, we got talking. I said, "Well, what's the left? What big one's the left to catch?" Like, just rifled through 15 fish, and some real good ones in there. And Scar had been out the other end, and a few other big girls had been out as well, baby
Mm.
poolies and blah 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 blah. Um, and I forget who it was. But someone said, "Oh, singles still to come out," and I was like, "That's I've seen that fish a few times. Big fish, again, not your typical Christchurch fish, but a real whacker." And so anyway, we all sat talking about single when it last come out, how big we thought it'd be, and I was like, "Right, fair enough. Let's get it back out." You never know. On the session I was
Yeah.
on, it was one of them ones where you could have talked anything onto the hook. So anyway, I went from not being really too worried about getting the rod
Yeah.
out, to almost frantically getting the rod out. I was, shaking still, trying to tie another rig up. By that point, there was hooks everywhere.
I was going to say, you must have got through some
I've
rigs.
got this, a picture of my brolly, just utter carnage. There's hooks everywhere that I've sharpened with shaky hands and like blunted and just thrown them down on the bed chair. And I even had one like hanging in the back of my trousers from where I'd sat down on it. So anyway, got another rig done, got it clipped on, wrapped up as quick as I could. I remember like everyone was standing there, everyone's watching. My heart was still going. Anyway, so the bar off the top of my head was around 12 wraps, and this spot out to the right was 14 and a half. So anyway,
Mhm.
wrap up, stand at the front of the swim. Everyone's watching. I'm thinking, for God's sake, just please go out first time. Please go out first time. So anyway, it went out beautiful, and it was sailing perfectly towards the spot. Rod was held nice and high. I'm thinking in my head, oh God. And all of a sudden, bang, it hits the clip, probably 20 yards above the water, bounces back, plunges into the water. Look, a complete tit in front of everyone. I'm thinking, oh, I'd wrapped it up to the bar. So I was like 2-3 rod lengths short of the spot. So I had to reel that back in, wrap it back up, re-steam the rig, just because it had, just where it had gone into the water with the big crash, it just wasn't right. Anyway, next cast went perfect. And I remember looking round at Robbie, and I was like, "Did you see that?" And he was like, "Yeah." He was like, "How hard did that go down?" I was like, "Oh, mate, oh God!" Like, he got it on the rest, sat down. Few of the lads moved off, but most of them were still there. And the bobbin just pulled up tight, literally nice and slow. It was like it was slow-mo. Pulled up tight and just held there. And as it did, I looked at the tip, and the tip just slowly bent round. Now, like the tension, it would be hard to try and explain what it was like.
Yeah.
You got some.
Was that like straight away, he's saying?
I'd probably say that rod had been out half an hour, 40 minutes.
Right.
It seemed a lot quicker.
Mm.
Obviously, at the time, once you got the rod out, sat back down, put the kettle
Yeah.
on. Well, that goes to show how quick it was. I cleaned the bivvy up real, just sort of scraped it off so I could sit down
Mm.
the bed chair, and I hadn't finished my tea when I had the bite. And yeah, I just remember picking the rod up, looking around at some of the lads, and I'm like, straight away, this huge. I remember it; it's clear as day. Just seeing this huge, like, bare flank just roll on the surface. And I remember looking around at Rob Allen, and I was like, "Did you see that?" And he was like, "No, no, no. What?" And I was like, "That's single. That has got to be single." And I remember thinking to myself, "Don't make yourself look at it. You haven't just seen that at that distance." Anyway, plugged around, came in under the tip, no bother. Was really good with the weed, and I remember it going in the net. And as it came over on its side, for a millisecond, I just saw this whopping great scale on its side. Now I'd never seen that fish in the water, hadn't been fishing there long. I literally remember dropping the rod. Rod fell clean in the water, and I just lifted the net. And as I did, it came up on its side without the scale. I was like, "Oh no, 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 no!" I remember like trying to I was rushing and shaking. I wanted to just see that other side, to see that scale that I'd seen as it went over. And sure enough, it was there. And I remember putting it in the sling, in the retainer, um, just to have a sit down, make a brew, give her a minute. And I remember saying to Rob Allen, I was like, "Mate, you just come out and have a look. We just come and have a look." Like someone had to confirm it. So he put his waders on, came out with me, opened the thing. He was like, "Yeah, it's definitely her, mate, like 100%." And she looked big as well, like really big. Oh, mate, it was such a buzz. Again, just all the same lads there. There was even more turned up in the swim once sort of word got
Yeah.
round that was in the sack and on the retainer. Yeah, got her out, and she went 44-12. Just colossal. I remember ringing Dan while we're up, just saying, I can't even believe this, mate. I've got single." And he was like, "Right, no worries." He said, "Look, bear with me, make a couple of calls, and I'll ring you back." And
Yeah.
he rang Tim, who was fishing on Stonies.
Tim Rowland.
Yeah, Tim Rowland. And Dan
Yeah.
said he's really nice lad. I've never met him before. He said he's mega with the camera. He'll come over and give you a hand. Well,
Yeah.
Rob Allen was there with his camera. I had Robbie there with his. Couple of lads were recording one on my phone. It was, I still watch, that footage back now, and I've watched it 100 times.
Yeah.
Just absolutely epic.
Yeah, because I've said this to other people. You don't, when you catch a good fish, it's a bit of a blur, isn't it? At the time, there's so many things you don't see or appreciate because you're so focused on looking after that fish. There's so
Yeah.
much. I think filming it is so handy.
Well, there was a few times during the filming where I kind of just knelt there, like in a complete daze, and look back on myself, like it's almost a little bit embarrassing. I think, God, what are you doing? Like, just get on with it. Like at the time, you couldn't believe it. Like I was just thinking, like almost was the lake easier than I'd sort of made it up to be in my head, or
Yeah,
was this what it was, and just an incredible session.
mm,
And it had to have been that because, like I said, lads like Rob Allen, I mean, he was really complimentary, and the buzz there was just really, really awesome. As it always is at church. I know I spoke about that before. Everyone
yeah,
gets involved. Obviously, after that session, I moved on to Stoneacres, and it's even more the case on there. Um, just everyone buzzes for everyone, and
mm.
just yeah, just a session that I will never ever forget. Got some amazing photos and some amazing footage.
Have you put the videos and things up on your Instagram or not, or just
Yeah,
the
so
photos?
to be honest, like it's probably some lads that are listening that are thinking, "Has he? Geez, it's all I've put up." But every time I go,
Who wouldn't?
well, during the lockdown, I obviously I get my SIM card out, plug it in the laptop, and just flick over pictures, and there is literally thousands from that session.
Mm,
I think I had something like, I'm sure it was just over 300 pictures of single scale
right.
from 3 or 4 different cameras.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, didn't have any at all on my camera, which was fine because, like I said, the lad did
Yeah.
a grand job. Um,
Yeah.
like I said, Timmy, well, all their photos were brilliant. Um, and every time I go on there, I find a different picture, whether it's a water shot or a bit of water
Yeah.
footage or me getting a soak in, or there's a particular one where I unzipped the sack and I thought I'd nipped a tail in the zip, and it was just one of those ones where you just have to think, when you're in the moment, you just have to really pinch yourself because, like
Yeah.
you said before, the fish is back and it's gone, and everyone's left to swim, and you're sat on your own thinking, like, has that just happened?
That's amazing. So you said obviously you did a bit on Stoneacres. I suppose that was cut short with the virus. How did you get on there?
Yeah, all right. So I hadn't used the ticket at all up to, I think, at the time worked for me. So at the time I just have springs really. I'm a
Mm,
gamekeeper, so my birds are due to come second week of June.
right.
With probably a few weeks getting ready. Well, you know, we're always preparing all the time, but that sort of month before the birds come is pretty manic.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of writes my summers off, which, to be fair, I've never been too worried about because I haven't been particularly keen on fishing for them after spawning anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just the autumn really that I miss and have done for a lot of years. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was. I snuck away. I think it was August. I did a couple of nights. Sean, the bailiff down there, top lad, and Nick as well. They both helped me out because I didn't have a boat at the time, so I
Yeah.
borrowed Sean's boat. I actually went there to do a couple of nights on church, and it was full. And Sean said, "Look, my boat's there. Use it." So
Yeah.
told me about a couple of spots. Let me use H blocks. I went out
Mm-hmm.
with his scope, although the clarity at that time of year was really bad. Um, Met a chap called Courtney. Um, he was fishing a couple of swims down to my left, or one swim down to my left, and it was just amazing. There was just the most beautiful sunsets, sunrises. It was just what I needed at that time of year. I was super stressed with work, really busy,
Yeah.
and it was a lovely couple of nights out on the bank. I actually only meant to do one, and the lads who worked for me at the time, and my missus Claire, she said, "Look, do another night. We'll sort of all pull together and sort of do my bit of the work and such." So
Oh, cool. That's nice.
yeah, but didn't. Well, I had a tench, so yeah, off a really long spot. Um,
Yeah.
didn't drop the lead either. So to crank that back from that distance for all that weed was just a sort of shock to the system, really.
Yeah.
Um, sort of tell from that moment that it wasn't going to be easy, and all the stories I'd heard. And Courtney made a huge barbecue one evening. There was another chap on, I can't remember his name, so sorry. He came down. We drank beer. Like, I took nothing. I took just enough for my session. I drank all Courtney's beer, cider, ate all his food, and he was so accommodating. I remember
Yeah.
thinking, all the sort of bits and bobs I'd watched on it, like Miles Gibson saying, what the socials were like on there, and yeah, it was all sort of coming to tuition. So it was nice. After that, I sort of got the stoning buzz a little bit, and
Yeah.
I went back in September. Um, Again, sort of was on the fence of whether I was going to fish church or stonies. Went with a mate, supposed to do a bit of a social. Again, managed to wangle work. Couple of my beaters helped out, misses. Like I said, the lads that worked for me again. Really lucky because at that time of year, I just simply shouldn't be out. So it was nice.
Mm.
I'd been at that estate for that was my fourth season, so we'd sort of got to grips with what
Right.
was what, and you learn when and when you can't get away with leaving, and it
Hmm.
worked quite nicely. When I think I did 3 nights, I got, and I went on to church, see a couple of fish show. Scott Lloyd was actually opposite me. I fished peg 4.
Yeah.
Uh, I put quite a bit of bait out. That time of year, I just felt they'd be up for a feed, or hoped they would be, and thought
Yeah.
I'd sort of go big or bust, really. And
Yeah.
I put a bit of bait out, and I bought some rod clips for the rods because I'd lost one, and
Yeah.
or one had broke. That's right. And I'd been to the tackle shop before. I'd gone to Lynch, and hell if I could find it. So anyway, before I got the rods out, I searched and searched and searched for these bloody rod clips. Or I went through the van, walked up and down the tracks, pulled all the stuff out of the brolly. Like went through. I could not find these things to save my life. And when I get something like that in my mind, like it just bugs me. I had to find
Yeah.
those clips. I knew I'd bought them. I knew
Yeah.
they'd be somewhere. So,
Yeah.
to cut a long story short, I said to myself, sort of early evening, right, I'm going to have one more look for these clips. So I pulled everything out of the brolly, went through it all again. Bearing in mind, I hadn't got any rods out at this point. I just put a hit of bait out. Wasn't in there. I thought, right, I'll go back to the van. Walked all the way down the track because the van was down by the calf. And as I sort of walked past Stoney's, was looking where I could to my right, bearing in mind that time of year it was all green and lush and lovely. Kept looking out, thinking, God, that
Mm.
looks good on there. Like the wind was howling down the opposite end away from the calf. And I think it's a southerly or southwest, something like that, it was blowing. And I got to Calf Bay, and at the corner of my eye, just as I walked around the corner to the calf, I saw like some ripples sort of coming out of the bay. And I
Yeah.
paid no attention to it at all. I remember thinking to myself, actually, definitely not a carp. It must be a bird. The stoneacres, they're not going to be
Hmm.
in a calf bay, like not unseen anyway at that time of year. Went to the
Yeah.
van, hoiked all my stuff out, couldn't find the things, swore a lot. Came back round to calf bay. I remember pulling my glasses off my head, putting them on, and just as I got to a little break in the sort of trees on the track, I looked in, and I remember just seeing 3 or 4 huge fish just cruising right up into the bay, into the shallows. And I just couldn't believe it. I remember falling to my knees straight away, thinking, "What? No way! Like someone has got to have seen these." Like, yeah, they were so obvious. The water in the bay was black.
Yeah.
You could really tell they'd chopped up. Now, never really looking now. I didn't know how deep it was,
Mm.
but there was no visibility at all. To see the bottom anyway. Um, so I rang my mate who was on charge. I said, "You're never going to believe what I've just found. Like, it's just these, and they were fizzing, sheeting up, like coming in. They looked active and really catchable. I remember thinking these are Stoney's fish. This can't be happening. They don't give themselves away, this easy. What am I going to do? So I remember standing there just watching for a while and tried to make out a few fish. I'm pretty sure I saw, well, in fact, I'm almost certain now I've seen Kev's Lynn in the water, that she was in there
Yeah.
feeding and looked
Right.
really big, really big. So I went back to my swim on church, sat contemplating, thinking, you know, are they going to stay in that bay at night? I thought the answer to that was no. I'd seen quite a few bits from Scott Lloyd and a few other people that said when they do come into Cav Bay, and I didn't think they literally meant into the end, feet from the bank, they make their way back out into the open water in the evening. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll go back down, a little bit of bait, just for dark. I'll put a little bit of bait in and I'll get there for first light, get the rods in, and obviously as the sun comes up and that bay warms up, they'll drift back in.
Mm.
As I came back, they were still sheeting. And I remember thinking, no, I'm going to have to fish for them. Fish for what you see. There was an opportunity there and I had to make the most of it. So I ran back. So bearing in mind, I've been up and down this track, I don't know how many times already, looking for those pissing clips and another. And went back, grabbed a couple of rods, grabbed a few bits, just my bed chair. I left the brolly there, made sure it was all right with Nick. As long as I was paying for that swim on church, he wasn't too bothered and it wasn't particularly busy.
Mm-hmm.
So, dropped back down, put on a long running chod, naked, stood at the swim, at the front of the swim, thinking this is crazy. The plan was to put one out in the entrance of the bay. I'd seen a fish head and shoulder there while I was watching the fish feed in the corner, and then I was gonna, put one down where they were fizzing. So stood at the front of the swim. I remember it thinking, right, underarm this out there. I could see sort of some high surface weed that fell into a little bit of a bowl where I'd seen the fish show. As I'm stood there, just as I sort of swung it back to sort of swing it out, this fish just showed. And I remember as it showed, seeing a scale that had been lifted on one flank. And as it showed and went over, I gave it a few seconds, thinking that it would right itself and maybe drift off enough for me to get the lead in. Little ounce lead, flicked it out, lovely, perfect. Dropped it down, nice and slack. Went over to the barra, got the other one ready, little bottom bait rig, waded the margin, dropped that into place, back on the alarm, was just setting the alarm. And I remember I had my waders on and I had my phone in the little pouch in the front of the waders talking to my friend on church. And I heard this literally just one tone. And I remember thinking, blimey, that's a savage one. And then all of a sudden, like this noise sort of overpowered the alarm, and it was just this ripping clutch. And then I twigged that I'd left my receiver way back out the way on the barrel, which is what I first heard. Then obviously, as this fish started to tear, the clutch was making more noise. And as I looked round, the line was going towards the spot. There was a huge boiling, like way out to the right, and the rods just hooped over. So, just people talk about their legs going to jelly. I can remember literally like quivering. I couldn't hold the rod still. Picked it up, and I could see the line, like I said, going to the weed, but the fish was way off to the right. And at this point, I'm thinking, no, please, please plink off. Playing it like an absolute girl. The clutch was really loose because I just didn't want it to fall off. Eventually, the line came off, straight to the fish, waded round sort of to the right hand side of the point there in that calf swim, and she came in, went in there, looked down, and I remember as I looked down, seeing this lifted scale and thinking that was the one I saw show.
Yeah.
Now, I had very little knowledge at the time of the stock. I mean, I know of a few bigger fish like the bus. That was definitely one reason I joined there. Number 9 bus and Kev's Lynn and Baby Bungles. That's one that I've really, really sort of took a fancy to. And a fish called Ad's Lynn. Now, Ad's Lynn, I saved that picture of Ad with that Lynn on my phone months before.
Right. Yeah.
And it looked like it. And I'm thinking, there is no way I've just dropped onto Stonies and caught that fish in 10 minutes. On barely 10 minutes, that rod's been out.
Yeah.
As I stood there, pulled the phone out the front of my pouch and my waders, got that picture up of Ad's Lynn, and it was it. I honestly couldn't believe it. Now, at that point, light was really fading. There wasn't a lot left at all. Courtney was on the lake. I rang him. I remember that conversation. I was like, mate, I've got one. He was like, oh, well done, nice one. He said, where are you? 4, I'll come and have a look. I said, no, I'm not on 4, I'm on Stonies. He was like, where? Because he was right down the other end on the end of the wind. I'm in Calf Bay. He was like, you're pulling my leg. You're joking. He was like, you are something else. He was like, I'll be round in a minute. Way he came, and the lad came back from church, and we did the pictures, and they sort of ended up being pretty much night shots. But Courtney had a really good flash, and I was super, super pleased with how the shots came out. But that was just, I mean, talk about gobsmacked. I didn't fish that night. I thought I'd ruined my chance. That fish had bored through weed bed, powered around on the surface like an absolute nutcase. So I took all my stuff back to church, had a really good social there, had a barbecue with a mate, a few beers, with the plan of reverting back to my original plan of dropping on there first thing the next morning. So put a little bit of bait in before I went, thinking, well, they'll drift out, but that bait will be nice and washed out and look a bit more natural for when they come back in the morning. Next morning, got up, put another hit of bait out in church, still haven't fished that spot, and wandered down to Calf Bay. The second I got there, I was just met by. I mean, I thought the day before was dirty. That morning, it was just ridiculous. They absolutely had not left that bay, and they'd fed all night, and it was filthy. There were sheets of bubbles everywhere. I was thinking, you idiots! Why didn't I just stay? Yeah, I think Dan Wildball was set to come down to do an article with Scott, who's on church. Didn't want to risk putting a lead on the feeding fish, so rang him. He was only, I think, sort of half an hour away. So we watched the fish together for a bit. I showed him where I wanted the rig, flicked a little stone there, gave him a stone, and said, look, when the coast is clear, flick a stone in, and I'll put, the rod to that. So anyway, I went down, got the rod, stood there, waited. I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, come on. Nothing. I was like, what's he doing? I was like, Dan. He was like, yeah. He's like, they won't leave. These fish were just absolutely having it. And anyway, eventually the stone went in. And I remember being literally a foot to the left of where he'd thrown the stone. When I set the rod up, went round and had a look, I put it a little too close to the bank. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not moving it now. I'll just leave it. I could just see my pop up. It was probably in 2.5, 3 foot of water at most. At most, couple of foot of water. Anyway, cut a long story short, I basically stood there for a long period that morning watching fish feed. And as the morning drew on to lunchtime, the less and less fish fed, and they were just cruising in at the bay. The sediment in the layers had started to settle, and they became really uninterested. And I was just gutted. But I remember thinking, oh, I should have just reeled it in, repeated, gone slightly further out. Had that bait have been, no exaggeration, a foot and 2 foot would have been ideal. Into the deeper water, I'd have had a bite, no question or doubt of it. So anyway, I stood with a friend, James, just watching, and then I remember this comment. No, actually, sorry, I missed a bit. Kev's Lynn and another big mirror, which at the time I thought was Magoo. That's been on the missing list for a while, and I don't think Fish Stock well enough to say it was that. I mean, Magoo is pretty distinctive in that it had a red eye. I can't remember seeing its red eye, but it wasn't that much smaller than Kev's Lynn. And these two fish were the only two fish that were occasionally feeding. And I remember them coming in, dropping down in that usual place, a couple of foot longer than the rig. I'm thinking, please, just one of you just drift that little bit closer. As I'm thinking this common comes in from the right, and it looked small. And I remember thinking, no. Like I hadn't watched those fish. There was probably a dozen different fish I'd seen in that bay. I remember this one came in, I thought, and I absolutely hadn't seen it before. And it was like it knew that pop-up was there. And it came straight to it on a completely different line than any others had took. In fact, it nearly sort of came in my inside margin following my line down to the rig. I remember
Right.
looking down at the floor, just thinking, if I can just find a little stone, just throw it at that common, just to try and turn it off, because these two big uns were there. And as
Yeah.
I looked down and looked up, it was then dropping onto the bait. It stuck the rig in. I remember seeing the hook sort of, set in the lip. It sat on its tail, big head shakes up off the bottom, and just bored straight through the middle of these two big fish. I was like, you. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't want to sound ungrateful, because any bite out of Stonies is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just thought you sprinted round to the rod, really gave it loads of pressure, tried to pull it away from that bay, got it round into that
Yeah.
rod and swim again. Anyway, when it went in the net, my mate James said to me, he was like, Jesus, it was like, it's a decent fish. So put the waders on, went out, lifted up, and it was this mega black common. And I remember looking at it in the net thinking, that wasn't the one that took that bait. Like, obviously, watch it do it, but it just
Yeah.
got that fish and the image of it taking the bait just didn't sit. Anyway, when we got it in, it was 35 on the nose,
Oh, crikey.
which just goes to show how
How big the others were.
how big those other two were. Dan,
It's funny, isn't it?
was still with Scott. He came back down and did me some mega shots. Dan's shots are always awesome. I've got a water shot of that on my Instagram. But I mean, what what a start! I did go back to church and put the rods out for a night, and that evening, my little lad fell off our climbing frame at home, broke his arm. So I was off first thing the next morning, but couldn't have been any happier.
God, that's amazing, mate.
Mega start.
Yeah.
Very aware though at the time though that how lucky I was, and I remember
Yeah.
thinking to myself, "Yep, you're going to pay for that." Like, waters like that don't give up opportunities very easily, and I'm very superstitious in that, like, you earn bites,
Yeah. No, I know what you
and I
mean.
hadn't earned those, absolutely not, and I thought, yeah, that's going to punish me for that, but yet to see.
How's it changed? How's anything changed after you having that mega session on Christchurch? If you had people messaging you on social media, anything changed?
um, I've met, obviously, in that session. I probably met more anglers in that week at church, or just over a week at
Yeah.
church, than I have in all my angling. Like,
Mm.
a lot of the lads that I met on that session, I speak to regularly. Oh, you still there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Um, I made some really, really good friends. Obviously, Sticky and Thinking Anglers used the photos and got quite a few messages off that. I'm no superstar or anything like that, but there was, handful of lads, like really nice lads, that sort of messaged and asked for advice. They were going on with some time off work, and more than happy to sort of give them my opinion on what I thought would be a good start and how to approach it. But no, not massively.
no.
I mean, it was obviously a really good session, and there was a lot of pictures there and info for Sticky and Thinking to use. And I did an article with Dan in Total Carp on it shortly after. That was really cool.
Yeah.
He actually came
Nice.
down that session and did some photos, and then we went over the sort of writing for it over the phone when I got home. So yeah, I suppose met a lot more people. Had a couple of 300 extra followers off Instagram off it. Not that I look into that, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was I just love it. I love my angling, and like I say, I'll milk that session for forevermore.
No, I bet, mate. How are you getting on with this lockdown?
um,
That says it all.
yeah. So like I say, I've had a bit of a career change. I'd say too much, go too deep into it, but I left my job at the end of last shooting season. So um, lots of different factors to the reasons why that, like I say, I won't go into, but I just think that I could be a lot happier and intend to be. Life's not all about work. I mean, gamekeeping is not a 9 to 5 job. It's, at certain times of year, well, most of the year, it's big, long days, 7 days a week. There's periods of 4 months, 5 months where days off are sparse. And when I say days off, I don't mean in addition to weekends. Like,
Mm.
we are 7 days a week. It's
Mhm.
really hard. And although my position at the time there, I was using a lot more thinking power than I was manual work because it sort of got to that stage. But yeah, felt like a change and left. So I got a couple of smaller shoots lined up back home in Suffolk. So I was moving from Hertfordshire back to Suffolk,
Yeah.
back to the family. I've got two young boys, so it was going to be really good for them. Um, although Jake, sort of my youngest, found it quite difficult in moving school and things like that. It was
Yeah.
I knew it would end up right for him. My brother and my sister and all my family here. So it
Yeah.
was nice to think that I was coming home. Um, I've actually moved in with mum, which was supposed to be temporary.
Yeah.
Pretty much as soon as we got here and we got the boys settled in school, this lockdown thing came into play, and it's been difficult, really difficult, to go from being a gamekeeper where you're outside,
Yeah.
99% of the time, and fishing, and I've always been like that, my whole life. To be cooped up in a house has
Mm.
been really, really difficult.
Yeah. Especially, I suppose, as well, the added sort of stress of moving back home. It's another sort of new environment, isn't it, with the kids there as well?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been a. That's the thing with gamekeeping. It's a way of life, and when you change jobs or move jobs within gamekeeping, it's everything. So my partner Claire, she worked for the estate. So me and Claire both have left our jobs. We've moved house, so we've lost our home, or not lost, but moved home. Uh,
Hmm.
Area, friends, everything. Your whole life changes. It's a big issue, or not an issue. It's a big thing for the family to deal
Mm.
with, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that move their kids all around the world, and dare I say it, wealthy people that have the money to have nannies and move kids from private schooling and get the extra help. But
Yeah.
my boys are very sort of, they're home lads, they're country lads. They both love the outdoors. They're so in tune
Hmm.
with what I do and how and why. It's. I mean, for me, like a lot of friends of, when you talk about homeschooling and things like that, homeschooling for
Yeah.
us hasn't been so much um, numbers, alphabets, spellings, writing. It's been more bird books, um, gardening, the sort of
Yeah.
realities almost, if that's the right way to put it, of life.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Little Jake, my youngest, he's 5, and we've gone for a little bird book, and he can reel these birds off like, you know they're not easy as anything, and you just think, I think
Hmm.
it's a good quality to have.
Yeah.
There's so many kids that don't know where their food comes from,
Yeah.
and that's causing massive problems, I think, in society, and also, um, I don't know if I'm okay to talk about this, but in the shooting community, there's a lot of anti problems, a lot of
Yeah.
anti-shooting, and most of that, in my opinion, stems from um, a complete lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, and in my opinion, it's all about educating our youths and children on where food comes from and how it's reared or killed and things like that. So I'm sort of paying more attention to that side of things because that's my kind of strength as a teacher, if that's the right word.
Hmm.
Or,
Yeah.
and I'll let the teachers when they go back do the proper schooling.
No, nice, mate. No, it's quite refreshing to hear, to be honest.
Mm.
One question that I'm sort of keeping in from, well, probably a couple of questions actually from previous guests,
Mm-hmm.
is the topic of watercraft.
Mm-hmm.
Um, talk to us a bit about that. I mean, like the original question was something like your three most important or most valuable watercraft tips. Can you tell us a bit about that?
um, yeah, so I basically committed the biggest sin you ever could in fishing and sold all my gear probably 5 years ago, just before I had the previous job I just left. Um, so I had 4 years off. So since buying all my gear back, I think it was not last October, the one before, my watercraft since then has been, in a sense, very limited because I've fished Sandhurst, Christchurch, done a little bit over at Bluebell, and just day ticket waters. Coming back in, I wanted to feel my way back, find the syndicates I wanted to fish, so I sort of stuck to the day tickets. And on the day tickets, it's very hard to use your watercraft. Like, watercraft is a word that a lot of people talk about. There's a
Yeah,
lot of videos and information on watercraft and how to use your watercraft, um, but it's finding the opportunity to put that into practice. And I think
no,
on
definitely.
day ticket venues, which a lot of people, um, well, I'd say most people are using in the angling community, it's difficult to use that there.
Yeah. When you look at, let's use that session where you did really well. Obviously, I was on just before that, wasn't
Yeah,
I?
yeah,
And you had to move how many times to get into that swim to get on the fish?
yeah. So, well, that's the thing. I mean, when I got there, I'd I'd got a feeling of, I knew what the weather was. That was really important. I checked that lots,
Hmm.
and I knew where I felt like the fish were going to be. So
Yeah,
I still had that plan in my head. I'd used my sort of pre-lake watercraft, if that makes sense, in
yeah, no, yeah, I know what you mean, like your
weather. Yeah,
homework almost.
exactly. Weather, moon phases, previous
Hmm.
captures at that time of year from the lake, etc., etc. Yeah, so I started in 7, moved to 10, moved to 21, and then moved to the new dig, which is where I had the hit. Um,
Yeah,
and I knew that was where I wanted to end up.
yeah,
So I used that. I booked the right amount of time off work. I felt that would get me in that swim for enough nights to, give it a good chance. But yeah, three things on watercraft. I think maybe we should. I mean, your eyes. I know it's talked about a lot, but just looking, perfect example, Dom. Actually, really, really good
mm,
example. I turned up to Christchurch that session, and I know I've spoken about this before, and I'll try to cut it down. The Every swim was taken other than the day only swims. And I listened to it back a few minutes ago. I think I said there was 21 anglers on. There wasn't. There was 19 anglers on
mm,
because the 2 day swims were free. Stood in the
yeah,
only, or yeah, 7 a day only swim. Saw a couple of little free fish show. Went in,
mm.
cast out, caught. Now,
I
watercraft,
did the pictures on that one, didn't
yeah,
I? Do
yeah,
you remember?
exactly. But watercraft doesn't come any easier than that.
Yeah.
I was forced into standing in that swim.
Hmm.
Saw a fish show. As far as I was aware, there, like that wasn't the first fish that showed. Those fish shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot during, before I got a rod out, after I caught the fish, and well into that afternoon.
Yeah.
There was people on that lake that had got a swim that missed that opportunity. Now that was a perfect time for one of those anglers to use that watercraft, get into that swim. Um, but you can get misled by, Christchurch has a certain way. You've seen it. You get in a swim. You reel in the morning, leave it quiet in the day, put the rods back out in the afternoon, and it's all. You can see it across the whole lake. It's very methodical. Everyone or most people do the same
Mm.
sort of thing. So to jump in that swim, naked chod, big length for lead core, into the area, little ounce lead with a C clip with no tube, so the lead came off, no tubing. It was easy. Watercraft made that capture very easy, and it was very easy of, sorry, it was a very easy piece of watercraft to implement to get that,
Mm.
that capture. Still there, Dom?
Yeah, can't. Sorry, mate. I thought you were going to carry on.
Yeah. So I think watercraft. I mean, it's a funny one. There's so many obvious points. You
Mm.
know, I guess the main one is looking, but
Yeah, no, that's really. I mean, funnily enough, that same session when I went in 21, I had one, I had two off the deck and then one just on a chod where they showed in the middle of the day, probably 6 rod lengths. Again, I think I was just catching the stragglers because I was in 21, which is obviously opposite New Dig for the people that don't know. And I was just getting the stragglers from that end.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was just one showed in front of me, wound in, same as you, put a chod on and flicked out. And I think that was the first ever fish I caught on the chod, actually.
Well, the interesting thing with that also is when I walked around there, I came to 21. I remember seeing a
Mm.
bucket in it, thinking, "Damn, just missed that swim." Well, it was you. Now,
Yeah,
the only bites I'm aware of that day, or within those couple of days, were mine and your bites.
yeah.
So the last actual swim to go, and one of the second of the only day only swims,
Hmm.
were the two swims that did fish. Now,
Yeah,
if that didn't tell you, to give you a piece of information to move on with, I don't know what would. And
yeah,
I've seen it on there since. Fish move to quiet water, which is why, one of my sort of strongest tactics, I'd say, is to find your spot, bait, and leave your rods out. Let them think that's the only water with no lines in. And I'm
mm.
sure that's why I did so well that session in Nudie, because they fed and fed and fed and fed on that spot over and over
Yeah, got
and over.
confident.
Yeah, and I'm sure those bigger fish came in. When you look at the list of fish, it did end up
Yeah,
at the end a lot of big fish. And I'm sure it's because they had so long to feed freely and gain so much confidence that when you did flick the rigs in, that hour or two,
yeah,
rods being in at the right time.
yeah,
I know people are keen to fish because they've taken time off work, and some people might not have as much time as others, but it's still about time. And if I do a 24-hour session and I only have the rods in for half that time,
hmm,
or even an hour of that time,
that's the right
the
time.
amount of times I've got to a lake, put the rod straight in, and done 24, 48, etc., hours and not caught,
Mm.
I'd rather have the rods
Yeah,
out. And yeah, so
no, nice. Um, okay, so the question for you on this like rotary style that we're doing is to do with zig fishing.
mhm.
It's basically what's your opinion of it? Do you rate it? Do you do it? What's your theory on them taking bits of foam?
um, I do it. I wouldn't say I like it. I
Mm.
wouldn't say I enjoy it, particularly if I'm fishing a venue. I have particular target fish in mind. Um, you know, I mean, sort of going against what I'm saying, I do love my surface fishing, which also is small hooks, light hook links. But um, yeah, just to cast a zig into abyss was difficult to
Yeah,
start with. But I'm not one to sit and blank when I know there could be a chance. So
yeah,
yeah, I do use them and have used them a lot more. Um, Sort of in recent times, sort of the last 3 or 4 bites I've had before lockdown were all off SIGs. Um,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's coming to that time of year where those hatches are happening. You've got fly larvae, coming up through the layers of water. Whether that be mosquitoes, caddis, stoneflies. Um, there's lots of different um, creatures that are drifting around, and to ignore it. I think that's why black foam obviously works so well, is because it imitates a bug, obviously mid layers.
yeah,
Finding that right depth is another thing, and I've learnt that a lot in the last sort of few weeks before lockdown. That a foot,
mm,
half a foot, half a foot can be the
yeah,
difference. And you're talking minutes. You change it half a foot, bang, bite. If
yeah,
and that if you just say, for example, 10.5 foot, you drop it to 10. You've had a rod sat at 10 foot for 24 hours, which I had, moved it
yeah,
half a foot, same area, same colour phone,
hmm,
and bang, right. Is that
yeah.
coincidence? I don't think.
You think if they're, I suppose, that time of year they're still a little bit lethargic and waking up, but you think that half a foot is going to be the difference from not being in front of their eyes and it being in front of their eyes, isn't it? I suppose.
On the other hand, where I've been able to use a boat on lakes, I've seen or had a zig in the edge. I've seen fish cruise past a perfectly positioned zig for
Mm.
hours and hours and hours and hours, and then all of a sudden, for what seems like no reason whatsoever, they'll take it. And I do think it's that irritating, you know, it's like
Yeah,
you can only take something for so long before something becomes irritating. And
yeah, some sort of lure fishing, isn't it, for carp in a way?
exactly, but how many times have you got to pull that lure past that pike's face before it eventually gets pissed off, just
Yeah,
nailed it? And I do think in some scenarios with carp it's the same. But I mean, one thing which, I mean, if I had to sort of give a piece of advice, personally that I've seen is normally when people go to zigs, they're longer, they're mid water or above.
yeah,
I've recently seen, not go into it too much, some caddis uh, that was crawling up some young, fresh weed growth. Uh,
right.
the caddis were sort of hiding away in. It looked like sort of sections of Norfolk reed, like hollow Norfolk reed. I know it
Okay,
wasn't,
yeah.
so it must have been a stick, but it was quite big. Um,
Mm.
and they were working their way up to the tops of the weed, and looking down, it just looked like lots of little broken stick, sort of hung up in
Mm.
all the weed. Now, a foot zig, lowered in that with your foam at that level, just touching the tops of that weed, is dead.
Yeah,
It doesn't have
yeah,
to be a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13 foot zig. I've
mm,
had a lot of fish off 1, 2 foot zigs.
yeah.
Um,
Same as that. I mean, years ago, when I first got into carp fishing, just on the local club lake as a lad, I was zig fishing without realising. I was using. I remember the old. I think I've said this before on the podcast. Like an old bit of snake skin, I think it was the Kristen
right.
stuff, probably like a foot long, but then using double dog biscuits on the hair, just fishing it straight off the lead.
Yeah.
I was probably almost surface fishing because I was right by the edge of an island.
Mhm.
I used to get loads of bites
Yeah.
from it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, this time of year, all the natural food is in that weed. Um, I've recently um, been doing a little bit on a private lake, not during the lockdown, I should add. And the amount of natural in the weed is just absolutely incredible.
yeah,
Incredible. Young, fresh weed growth is just a haven, an absolute haven, and a low zig just over the top of that is deadly, deadly. And
nice.
also, I'd say
Um,
a lot of people stick to sort of, I'd say a huge percent of people use black foam. Um, look at the caddis or whatever else it is you think is going to be floating around, and try different colours. Um, there's uh, there's some colours which I've used recently that you don't see used often at all. Um, and yeah, so I'd just say swap and chop. Don't be afraid to
yeah,
try anything. No matter how
no,
bizarre you
definitely.
think it might be. Zig fishing is bizarre, I think, in itself. To cast a
Mhm.
tiny little bit of black foam out and catch in the middle of the night. I mean, there's not much more bizarre than that, is
No, definitely, mate. Have you got a question we can ask our next guest?
there? Something I've sort of dabbled in a little over the last sort of year or two um, has been peanuts.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think there's a huge amount out there about peanuts. I've seen lads use them a lot for singles, so maybe someone could shed some light on their opinion on how many you can use, uh,
Yeah.
how you cook them, how you prepare them. There's a lot of scaremongering about peanuts, undercooking them, using too many, and harming fish. So
Hmm.
maybe, maybe someone could shed a little bit of light on that.
Okay, that's a nice one. Different as well. Um, I thought we could do a quick fire round just to finish it off.
Mm-hmm.
I've only just written these questions down. A lot of them are obvious and a bit cliche and been heard before, but we just fire through them. What I don't want you to do is go, oh, like one situation needs this and it. I just want a one-word answer. Okay.
Mhm.
If you start going, oh, I'm just going to turn the microphone off.
Okay, mate, no worries.
I've only written down, I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions. Ready?
I'm ready.
Pop up or bottom bait?
Pop up.
Singles or a better bait?
Better bait.
Stalking or bait and weight?
Bait and weight.
Heavy or light lead?
Heavy.
Surface lay or use a bucket?
Bucket.
Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Gaylord. Cook or takeaway?
Takeaway.
Hang around with Scott Lloyd too long. Folded handles or out?
100% out. Why would you fold a handle? I just...
I'll let you off that one because that was the last question as well. My views are the same.
There you go. There's my question for the next angler. If someone can justify why they need to fold a handle, I'd love to hear that. Really.
I'm writing that down. Why folded handles in capitals. One last thing before you go, mate.
Yeah.
Can you draw a carp in 60 seconds and just send me the video and the picture of it, please? I'm going to do a little competition, lockdown competition. Like I said in the last one, I didn't realize it was going to go on for this long, and I've got loads of entries.
Yeah.
So I've got a whole day probably posting up then. But yeah, if you could do that.
Yeah. No problem.
Sketch a carp and send it over, mate.
Righto. No problem at all, Dom.
Awesome. Lance, thank you very much for coming on again. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, really enjoy it. Really, really good to be back on and finish that little story off. Hopefully we haven't bored too many people with that same old Christchurch session. But
no, you won't, mate. Honestly, it was a mega session. And as well, if you've got any bits of vid that I can put up as well, that'd be quite good for people to see that haven't seen it.
Yeah, no worries. I'll find a couple of bits perhaps that haven't been used, if there's any. No, there is. There's plenty. I'll find some little snippets and send a couple over to you again.
Cool, awesome. All right, Lance, thank you very much for coming on. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, Dom.
Take care.